You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey Doctorow,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mott,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is Rachel Renee Russell. Remember to go to hankgarner.com to subscribe to the show. You can subscribe on Apple Podcast or Stitcher Radio or Spotify, YouTube, and even now on Pandora. If you listen on Pandora, you can listen to the show there now as well. Just about anywhere that you like to listen to podcasts, you can catch author stories. I'd like to thank Crystal Pico Watanabe for sponsoring today's show. The Pico's House website now has a new look. She has a team of 8 people who help provide services to fiction authors. Her full slate of services now include beta reading. She has expanded her beta reading team to 4 beta readers now. Manuscript critique, developmental editing, line editing, copy editing, proofreading. Authors can inquire about putting their books into her Book Lovers box, which is a monthly digital subscription box with a different theme each month. This is free for authors for a limited time. If you're an author, Crystal provides just about everything that you could need. She is a one-stop shop with Pico's House to help you make your book the very best it can be. Visit picoshouse.com. That's Pikkoshouse. Thank you, Crystal, for faithfully sponsoring the show. I'd also like to thank my friend R.A. McCandless, who has a fantastic new series called The Constable of Aqualine. And the first book is The Clockwork Detective. This is a steampunk detective novel, the beginning of a series that I am absolutely in love with. Aubrey Hartman left the Imperial battlefields with a pocket full of medals, a fearsome reputation, and a clockwork leg. The Imperium diverts her trip home to investigate the murder of a young druid in a strange town. She is ordered not only to find the killer, but prevent a full-scale war with the dreaded Fae. Meanwhile, the arrival of a sinister secret policeman threatens to dig up Aubrey's own secrets, ones that could ruin her career. It soon becomes clear that Aubrey has powerful enemies with plans to stop her before she gets started. Determined to solve the mystery, Aubrey must survive centaurs, thugs, and a monster of pure destruction. You're going to love this book, I guarantee it. It's called The Clockwork Detective by R.A. McCandless. Now stay tuned. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Rachel Renee Russell on the show with me today. If you have a middle grader or have been around a middle grader for the last, decade, then you have probably had Rachel in your house in one way or another. She is the author of the Dork Diaries, and she has a new series, Book 3. The Misadventures of Max Crumbly is out today when we're recording this. Welcome to the show, Rachel.
Oh, thank you. I'm very, very happy to be here.
Well, I'm excited to have you. Rachel, we begin each show with the same question. And that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
My first memory, okay, I've always loved books. As a matter of fact, as a child, I remember being in school and the teacher handing out those scholastic weekly readers, and I wasn't so interested in reading the weekly readers. Usually in the back section, there was a little pull-out where you could order books. So,
yes.
And I would order like a dozen of them, and I was always very surprised that when I would take it home and give it to my dad, because my mom would always say, "Oh, well, give that to your dad and get the money from him in order to buy the books." He would basically just pay for whatever I ordered. So I would order a dozen books or 15 or 18, and our books would come in 2 boxes, one for the classroom and then another box that was for me, because I was always ordering, a dozen or 2 dozen of them. So those were my earliest memories of just almost being obsessed with reading. And from that, I think I was inspired to, want to create my own stories. And that was probably like first or second grade or whenever they started handing out those weekly reader book order forms.
Oh man, and they were just like a teaser all year long for that Scholastic Book Fair. Did you guys have those?
Exactly, and I think they came in. I don't know if it was monthly or I guess weekly for the readers, but I would order books usually monthly is what my dad would allow.
Yeah, that's so cool. Do you remember when you first started writing your own stories? When the love of books and stories turned into, well, I think I can do this. Let me try my hand at this.
Yes, the very first book I wrote, I was probably maybe about 10 or 12 years old, and I have twin brothers, and it was their birthday, and I wanted to give them a really creative gift. So since I enjoyed reading them picture books, I decided to make a picture book for my brothers, and they were the characters of the book. Their names are they're Don and Ron, but back then they were Donnie and Ronnie, since they were probably about 3 or 4 years old. So I made a picture book called the Donnie and Ronnie book, and it was basically them doing all the favorite things they like to do. So they were, I think back then, playing with the dog and climbing trees and, all of those water balloon fights and that. So my picture book was just basically a series of my two brothers' favorite activities.
That's fantastic. Did you ever have a? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say I think I still have a copy of it too. I think my mom saved it, and I think it's somewhere between my house and her house. But it was made out of construction paper too, so it's an oversized book that is made of construction paper pictures and my handwriting.
I love it. Did you? I know your parents were very supportive of your book habit. Did you ever have a teacher that recognized this love of stories and encouraged you?
Yes. In third grade, each of the classrooms were able to present a play on actually. In elementary school, our library was on the stage because it was a fairly large library, a fairly large stage, I should say. But the back wall was all books. So whenever it was library time, we'd go to the gym and then climb the 4 steps to the stage, and then that was the library. So every year, the third grade classes were able to put on their own play, and I had a teacher that actually allowed me to write the play. So, yeah, that was, so I guess it was even earlier than my Donnie and Ronnie book, if I count, the teacher actually allowing me to sit down and it actually wasn't anything original. It was just kind of a rewrite of Hansel and Gretel. So I wrote the lines and the characters and all of that. So that was the first teacher that actually, realized that I was a creative writer and, handed me a project, which was to basically write the play of Hansel and Gretel that her classroom was going to perform.
I love those kinds of stories because, as a writer, there can be some kind of dark days where, it's just you and the laptop or, the sitting at the keyboard and it can be a daunting task, but those memories always come back of that early time when someone encouraged you and realized that there was something there. And I've never had someone not be able to pull back one of those memories. Those are so important to youngsters.
Yeah, and it's strange that you asked me that question because I hadn't thought about that teacher or that play for probably decades.
But it stuck with you. That's
yes,
amazing. Definitely.
When you asked, I was able to think, and actually now that I think about it, I think it was 5th grade, not 3rd grade. I think it was 5th because my teacher was Mrs. Eggers. So you're just having me go way back down memory lane. So yeah, it was 5th grade and the teacher was Mrs. Eggers and I adored her and she said, well, we have to do this play and Rhonda, I want you to sit down and, we're going to do Hansel and Gretel and I need a script from you and I'll give you a month to work on it. So.
Oh, that's fantastic. I know that you went on to practice law. What was your fascination with law that took you down that career path?
Well, I always wanted to help people. So either I was going to go into like social work or, I just wanted to spend my life helping people solve problems. So it was either that or law, and I chose law. And what attracted me to it was, again, the possibility of a person coming to me with a big problem, and then me being able to sit down with them and then, either solve it in my office, with whatever legal means, or to go into court, and advocate for them. So that was what I really wanted to do with my life. And the great thing is that even though that was my initial passion, I've been able to do that with both of my book series, Max Crumbly and Dork Diaries, because the stories that I present and the way that they're told and the plots, and that once children are able to get through the book, they usually tell me that the book was inspirational to them and that it helped them, with whatever problems they were having, be it in school or being bullied or, not getting invited to birthday parties or so it's the things that I liked best about being an attorney. I was able to find those in being a children's author, which is very weird now that I think about it.
I'm always fascinated by the intersection of passions and forms of expression. Do you find that your time as an attorney informs the way that you write, or that maybe helps in your storytelling, if that makes sense?
Yes, well, a lot of attorneys become authors because of the legal writing training that you get. We spend an entire, in my law school anyway, we spent an entire year having to learn legal writing, and it's a year, so every day for 365 days, or probably 9 months of the law school year, you actually write, and you write briefs, and you write an analysis of things and whatever. So I think the discipline of having to do legal writing for court cases and briefs and that, and the training is, a lot of attorneys are able to take that training and use it for creative writing. So I don't know if, so yeah, I think so. And it's probably more discipline than anything, I think, to be able to sit your butt in a chair and have to produce, this brief because the case is going to court in a couple of weeks. You just have to do it. There's no ifs and buts about it, or else, you aren't going to be able to be an attorney because they will disbar you because you didn't file your brief on time. So I think that whole mindset of the discipline and the deadlines translates over to being a published author really well, even though at that point you're dealing more with creative writing.
Sure. Well, in 2009, you introduced us to Nikki Maxwell and brought us the Dork Diaries. When did you start thinking about writing fiction again?
I actually, even as a young adult, I wanted to be an author, but I wasn't sure how I would make a living, and I didn't know any authors. Had I known some, or, back then, this was like, I graduated from high school like in the late 70s, authors weren't really doing book tours and that, so it seemed like a goal that I would never be able to achieve, and that I probably wouldn't be able to make a living and eat and pay my rent. So I decided to go to law school. By the time my kids had grown up and were going to college, I had a lot of extra time on my hands. So I thought, well, maybe I'll, pursue this writing thing again. So I sat down, and in my spare time after work, I would start working on a manuscript. And my two daughters, again, growing up, were very, I'll say dorky. Not that I didn't think they were, I thought they were perfect. Most parents think their kids are perfect, but they were kind, they were warm, they got good grades. I didn't, I never had any trouble with them, like sneaking out and getting in trouble or wrecking the car or doing those kind of things. But for some reason, kids at their schools gave them a really, really hard time. And maybe they were like goody two-shoes or too nice or whatever, but my daughters were called dorks, and they were called nerds, and they were teased, and they were bullied. And with bullying, I would say it's more of the mean girl thing. They weren't like physically beaten or, they didn't get chased home from school like sometimes you see with guys. But mean girls gave them a hard time. They didn't get invited to birthday parties, and they made fun of their hair and their clothes and, whatever. So it broke my heart, and I was wondering, like, am I doing something wrong as a parent here? But that's just how school is, and unfortunately, in most schools, there are always those kids that are teased and bullied or whatever, and it just happened to be that my two daughters were the victims of that. We got through them. Ultimately, I did transfer schools, and a lot of times you'll hear, parents say, well, you have to have the kids stick it out and whatever, and sometimes that works, but each situation has to be looked at, and and as a parent, you have to make a decision. With some kids, maybe they're able to tough it out. With some kids, they'll melt down, and nowadays kids are even getting suicidal, based on bullying and that. So for my two daughters, maybe because they're more sensitive, my decision as a parent with my husband at the time was to pull them out of that school, put them in a smaller school, smaller parochial school, and they became like two different kids. They bloomed, they were happier, the kids were friendlier, and one daughter joined drama, the other daughter started a debate team. So being in a more nurturing, kind environment was, the right thing, for my two daughters. So long story short, when I sat down and decided that I wanted to write a children's book, I wanted to, again, write something that would help people and that would be inspiring and that would possibly solve a problem for another child that was reading the book. So I took a lot of the situations that my daughters had found themselves in or the things that they complained about, and I put it in Dork Diaries, and kind of the rest is history.
Love it. It takes a special person that can write children's books, and especially this kind of targeted audience that you write to, this middle grade. There's a lot of complex things that are happening with kids at that age, like you so eloquently put, about what your daughters had gone through. It's really complex, and to think that, some people think, oh, well, writing books for kids should be easy. You just kind of write goofy, silly stories, and until you actually sit down and try to write for children. And it is very, very difficult, because children can be a very fickle, group, and they can spot someone who has imperfect motivations pretty quickly, because kids can tell if you're just pandering to them, or they can also tell if you really understand them. Is it something that you struggled with, or did you just immediately connect with this age group? I think a lot of people would love to know, how they can do it better.
With me, I basically was able to channel a lot of the drama, the good, the bad, and the ugly that I went through for like 2 or 3 years with my own kids. So I won't say it was easy, but I did have that to draw on. So I would say that individuals that are teachers or parents, or even if you just, have a passion for, volunteering for kids or whatever. I think, I don't know, my experience is that you probably would have to have some kind of connection to children to be able to relate to them a bit, to be able to sit down and be a good children's author. I might be wrong, and maybe there are single people that hate children, that don't want to be around children, and they're fabulous children's authors. But I would think that you'd, have to really enjoy them and interact with them a little bit, so you can kind of get into their heads and have an idea of how they think. Because with Dork Diaries, the main character is a 14-year-old girl, and with Max Crumbly, the main character is a 14-year-old boy. So I have to be able to write in those voices and think like they do, and So my theory is that you probably would have to have a close connection to kids, or or at least a passion for them, and to hang around them a little bit to be able to channel, those voices.
I love that you took the word dork and kind of took the sting out of it and gave kids something that they could sort of champion. It's kind of like how when I was growing up, in the 70s and 80s, and nerd and geek were pejoratives, and now we wear our geek and nerd stuff right on our sleeve, and superhero movies are the most popular thing in the world now. And the tide has turned. It's like you take a word and you take the sting out of it and almost empower kids with it. Was that a conscious thing?
Definitely. As a matter of fact, I didn't do that. My daughters did that. And they did it when they were still kind of in that negative environment, which was that, yes, I'm a dork. Yes, I'm different, but I'm proud of it. And, so there you go. So yeah, they both had a change of heart, and they were starting to stand up to the kids a little bit. And that's when I thought, it's time for me to go, because I didn't want either of my daughters punching out another kid. They were getting sick and tired of it, and they were like, I'm a dork, and get over it. So, and again, I didn't, want them to get so aggressive with this newfound empowerment of being a dork, that it actually became a problem and they ended up in trouble themselves. So I thought, let me pull them out of the school and let's start over again. So yeah, and you know what? Who runs the world? The dorks and the nerds and the geeks. We have Microsoft, we have, Amazon, and, these are all, guys and women that, were in STEM, and math and engineering and electronics, and they were creating the internet and software and apps. So they were basically the nerdy scientists that were probably picked on in middle school and in high school. So I think that has changed the whole environment too, because a lot of, again, the major world leaders in the tech field and computers and that were these same dorky, nerdy, geeky kids that are all billionaires now, by the way.
Yeah, right. Of course they are.
Tens of thousands of people.
Right. The main character in the Dork Diaries is Nikki Maxwell, and I know that one of your daughters is named Nikki. Did you share with your daughters that first manuscript as you were writing it? Were you writing it in complete anonymity? When did you bring them into the fold?
Yes. As a matter of fact, when they went off to college and I told them that now that I have all this extra time on my hands, because both of them, they were a year apart, so they both left home within a couple of years. And I told them that my new hobby was working on a children's manuscript. And they're like, "Oh, Mom, that sounds cool. What's it about?" So I shared it with them pretty much early on. And I did ask for permission to be able to use their names. My older daughter, Erin, was not very cool with it. So she's like, "I don't know, Mom. I don't know how good this manuscript is going to be, or how crazy your characters are going to be. So no, I pass. I'd rather you not use my name." But my younger daughter was like, "Oh, how cool would that be? My name would be in a book." "Sure, Mom, go right ahead." So Nikki Maxwell has a younger daughter, and my initial plan was to have the older daughter named Nikki and the older daughter named Erin and the younger daughter named Nikki, as like they are. But since my older daughter was not having it, we just went with Nikki, and Nikki did give me permission for that, and they both did give me permission to use a lot of the experiences that they had in middle school and even in high school for some of just basic plots. So we've changed the names and the places and that to protect the innocent, but or not so innocent in some cases. There were girls there. So Mackenzie is based on the girl that terrorized them at their first school. Her name was not Mackenzie, though, so we changed the name. But so they both did give me permission to be able to use a lot of the things. It's just this is plot points, and whatever.
Well, I know that that even though you used your Nikki's name, the characters in your books are not completely your daughters or you. How do you go about kind of making up these characters and giving them traits, and what do you look for in characters when you're working on a story?
I would say a lot of, for Nikki Maxwell, the main character in Dork Diaries, she kind of just developed into her own character based on the experiences and the things that she lived through in the books. It sounds weird, but that's kind of, and that's probably with any character. You create them initially, but as they go through chapter and of the books, they have experiences and they do things, and they're impacted positively or negatively by the situations that I put them in. So they just kind of, get molded or develop into their own characters. So that's probably how I would explain it with Nikki Maxwell. She's bullied by Mackenzie, so that's very humiliating for her. But deep down, she knows that she's a good person. She has two good friends, Zoe and Chloe, that encourage her. So even when she gets very frustrated or starts feeling down or even sorry for herself, she's able to bounce back because of her two friends and the fact that she knows that Mackenzie's just a mean girl, and she really should not even be paying any attention to a lot of the stuff that Mackenzie is saying, even though she does internalize it and it does make her feel bad. And that's how it is in real life. I mean, even as an adult, I've had jobs at law firms where my boss didn't like me or a coworker didn't like me, and they just make your life miserable. And you have to try your hardest to not internalize that or not to let them get to you to the point where you figure, well, I'm not a good attorney, or I don't know what I'm doing. They may be telling you that, or that they may be gossiping about you in that way, but you have to rise above all of that. So it was not too difficult to do because, again, between my own personal experiences and what my daughters lived through, it was kind of easy to create the same situations with Nikki Maxwell and Dork Diaries, and then let her grow and evolve, from those experiences.
Sure. When that first book was published, it found an audience pretty quickly and was loved by kids all over the place. You've written 13 books in that first series and sold quite a few copies around the world. Were you surprised that the stories that you created connected with kids so deeply and they became so passionate about the stories you were making?
Yes, I was surprised. I was hoping that the first book would do well enough for me to get a second book. And I was like, wow, if I could get 2 books out of this, I'll just be over the moon. So little did I ever imagine that I'd be doing this 10 years. This is my 10th year anniversary, by the way.
Congratulations.
10 years later, and I think we're in 42 I always say countries, but it's not 42 countries. It's 42 languages because there's a lot of English-speaking countries. So anyway, 42 languages, and I think we're at 44 million in print based on just the numbers from last month. So no, I had no idea. The other thing that I always thought was a little strange is that I thought that the whole, Dork Diaries concept in middle school and Mean Girl, I thought that probably would work well in the United States because you see that on Disney and Nickelodeon, but I had no idea, again, that there'd be other countries that in Norway or Brazil or South Africa or wherever that these same kids would relate to this situation. So what I figured out is that teens are basically, or tweens, because teens are, I would say, probably the 14 to 18-year-olds. My demographic is a little bit younger, and I would say probably that those are 8 years old to 14-year-olds. Tweens are pretty much the same all over the world. That's what I've learned from this, is that tweens are pretty much the same all over the world, and they have the same issues that they're dealing with, and that's family and getting older and turning into a teenager and dealing with homework and teachers and your siblings and parents and making friends and first crushes and first love. Again, it sounds naive of me to even say this, but yeah, it's all kids all over the world are struggling with these same issues, and they're trying to find themselves, and they're trying to be confident and just figure things out, at that age. So that was just like mind blowing to see that not only was this something that people in the United States and Canada could relate to, or tweens, but all over the world.
I love that the stories are universal, that when you peel back all of the things that separate us and make us different, we really are all the same. Our experiences, it's just kind of mind blowing, and it's funny that a children's book can be that great, gap maker, that can bridge that gap.
Yes, exactly. And then too, even with like, I don't know if third world country is like politically correct, but there are, little girls that might walk a mile to get water, for their village and walk back. They're reading my book, and it means something to them and they relate to it, so that was, again, very mind boggling too. But again, that same young girl probably has a crush on the guy in the next village and, whatever, and they go to school and whatever. So it's basically the human, condition, I guess, at that age.
Well, I know your daughter, Nikki, is represented. It may be only a name in the Dork Diaries, but your daughter, Erin, who didn't want to be, and there shows up in your new series, The Misadventures of Max Crumbly, where we've got Max, this fantastic character, and his sidekick, Erin. Where did Max come from?
I have a story behind that. So after my younger daughter, Nikki, had agreed to allow her name to be used in Dork Diaries, and here it was on the New York Times bestsellers list. I think we're going on like 288 weeks, and when we sign books, kids are all excited, like, oh, you're the same Nikki. So my older daughter's like, well, Mom, you're launching this new book series, and if you would like to use my name, Erin, as a character, that would be really cool, Mom. So I'm like, okay, now I have permission.
You want to come to the party.
Yeah, exactly. So yes, I did, in fact, get permission finally, like 5 years down the line. So again, my older daughter, who was not interested in having her name used in Dork Diaries, kind of insisted on it, because I was like, oh, well, Erin, we don't have, I had another name picked out, actually, and was using it in the manuscript. And I'm like, oh, well, no, Erin, no problem. I had no pressure. She's like, Mom, I really would like for you to use my name. And I'm like, well, no, Erin, I know you're, Mom, please use my name. And I'm like, okay, fine. So that's how Erin became Erin and Max Crumbly, because my older daughter decided that she wanted her name in the book, after, the success of Dork Diaries.
That's so
funny.
So
we have Erin and Max Crumbly.
So where did the character of Max come from, and what inspired you to start this new series when you've got the Dork Diaries that have such a massive following, and we've talked about people all over the world connecting. What makes you then want to turn your attention to some new characters and new stories? What was the motivation for Max and his series?
So whenever we did book signings and met with fans, even though Dork Diaries has a female main character, we have lots of guy fans or young boys reading, because it's funny. And I have had a lot of boys say that if they would like to know how girls think, you need to read Dork Diaries, because then you'll be able to figure out how girls think and use that, in your interactions with girls. So I've heard that a few times from some very smart young guys. So, but anyway, when I would do book signings, my guy fans inevitably would always say, oh, Miss Russell, you should really make another book series and have it be a guy. I mean, it could be a guy who has a journal and he's writing in it and doodling it. So after about the 1,000th time that I'd heard that or I'd received that request, I thought, you know what, maybe there's something to this. And so Max Crumbly was a character in Dork Diaries, and I think he was in Dork Diaries book 10 when I first introduced him. But he went to a different school. So after, again, I started seriously thinking about doing a spinoff of some type, I thought, well, I have all these guy fans, and they keep asking me and begging me for a book series that has a guy main character. So that's when I decided to do it. So basically, it was, after hearing that idea from so many fans. So what I did was I thought, well, I wanted to be similar to Dork Diaries, and I wanted to be an illustrated novel, a graphic novel. Technically not a graphic novel, but we call it an illustrated novel, which has a lot of pictures and doodles and that. And when I was thinking about inspiration, I thought, well, what's my favorite movie? And my favorite movie is Home Alone. After all of these years, Home Alone is still my favorite. So I thought if I took the best of Dork Diaries and the best of my favorite movie, which is Home Alone, and mishmashed them together, what type of, plot and concept would that create? And it ended up being Max Crumbly. And the whole thing with Max Crumbly is that he's, again, similar to Nikki. He keeps his own journal. He's a fairly decent artist, so he draws and doodles. He's into comic books, and he's into superheroes, so that was a little bit different from Dork Diaries. So his thing is that he's obsessed with comics and superheroes and drawing and that. He starts a new school. His first week goes fine, but then there's a kid there, Doug Thurston, and his nickname is Thug. Thug decides that he doesn't like Max. His bad habit is sneaking up behind Max when Max is, at his locker, pushing Max into his locker and then slamming the door shut. So Max is in his locker. He's humiliated. The first 10 or 15 minutes, he's just in there, like, having a meltdown, but at some point he has to kind of knock on the door or say yoo-hoo and try to get the attention of kids that are wandering up, through the halls to go get the janitor to unlock him, to get him out of his locker. So what happens, again, being inspired by Home Alone, on a 3-day weekend, Thug shoves Max into his locker at the end of the school day. Max is trying to get out. Ultimately, the lights go out, the janitor leaves, and he's stuck basically in his locker for what looks like a 3-day weekend. By being an older school, he's, after about 4 hours, and by then it's maybe 9 or 10 o'clock at night on a 3-day weekend, he's able to kick out the back drywall of his locker and make a hole and kind of climb into a janitor's closet that was behind it, and he's able to get out. So he's on his way out, and by then it's maybe like close to midnight when he finally is able to make his way out. And he's crawling through the ventilation system, again, to leave the school. He notices or spots 3 guys that are in the computer lab stealing the school's brand new computers. So he could just continue on through the ventilation system, climb out, somewhere in the hallway and be out of the school and be over. But he decides that he could change his life and not, and become this popular hero at his school if he could stop the 3 burglars from cleaning out the school's brand new computer lab. So he decides to stay in the school, and he launches basically a war against these 3 burglars. And by there being a cafeteria, we have a lot of fun with food fights. By there being the gym and all the athletic equipment in there, he's able to jury rig one of those baseball pitcher things and hit the burglars. So anyways, again, the Home Alone concept of him fighting the 3 burglars. So they want to obviously stay there long enough to get the computers, and he's, doing things and harassing them to try to get them to leave, and this goes on for 3 books. So again, I'd say Home Alone and Dork Diaries were the inspiration for Max Crumbly.
I love it. When you're creating characters and building story, and you've had a lot of connection with your readers over the last decade that you've been making these books, how important is it to you to create characters that kids can see themselves in, and how important is it to have a diverse cast of characters? And how do you go about doing that so that you make sure that your readers can feel welcomed and can feel like they can place themselves in these stories?
Yes, well, I think now that concept is called, I guess, a mirroring, and that a child can open a book and see themselves in it just as they would see themselves in a mirror. And that was really, really important to me. I'm African American, and growing up, there were, especially like in the, I graduated like in the late 70s, so in elementary school, that would have been like in the 60s, late 60s maybe. And there were a lot of books with kids that looked like me. I still love the books anyway, but sometimes you'll lose, unless you're like a very, very avid reader, you won't be attracted to books to begin with, because when you look at the cover or when you see the characters, if you can't relate to them, you wouldn't even open the book. I didn't really have that problem because I just loved reading. And I mean, I didn't care if it was a book about a dog or a squirrel or, whatever. I was so passionate about reading, I could get beyond that. But with a lot of kids, and I'd say probably even the majority of kids, they would be a lot more interested in the book and be more willing to open it and invest in reading it if there's something that they can relate to or if the character looks like them, for the initial hook anyway. And then once they open it and they get into it, then, at that point, they're invested in the story because it's interesting or exciting or, thrilling or scary. But to get the kid to even open the book, a lot of times you have to make it something that they'd be initially interested in. So that's why it's good to have diverse characters and brown faces, and all different ethnicities of little kids on the covers of the books, because other kids will see those, and not only will the child that looks like the child on the cover open it, but children of other ethnicities may say, oh, well, that's an interesting character, or that's a little bit different, or I would like to know what their life is like. So that's why diversity is important, and that's why I have diverse characters in all of my books as well.
What about characters with multiple ethnicities?
Yes, as that as well, and we're seeing that in this day and age, even more so. So that's all a good thing. And there was I would say there was a movement that started maybe about 3 or 4 years in publishing, and to me it started with We Need Diverse Books, and there's been a really big push for diversity. But part of that is as well as that the population of elementary school children in the next, I think it was either 3 to 5 years, is going to be 52% children of color. So the publishing industry had to kind of, sit down and, figure out how they are going to continue to sell books to a reading population that's 52% children of color, when 90% of the books that they had at the time were mostly white children or Caucasian children. So, and I think that they're doing a decent job of it, and I'd say probably in like the last 3 to 4 years, there's been a big push to diversify the characters in children's books, because the children reading them need to be able to see themselves. And since that number is like 50% now, or 52% or whatever, there was going to have to be a major change if they were going to continue to keep children interested in reading. So that's my take on things. The diversity and publishing having to stop and kind of reevaluate things is a good thing, in my opinion.
Sure. Well, and even past that, the important thing is that we make books that draw kids in and make them want to feel like they're part of the story. And you absolutely do that. You welcome kids in from the beginning, and then you give them a story that they can rally around. And I absolutely love that about your books.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, the new book is The Misadventures of Max Crumbly. This is the third one, called Masters of Mischief. Happy book launch day when we're recording this. When people are hearing this, it's out everywhere. Even audiobook and Kindle edition, it's out everywhere. Rachel, if people are just learning about you and want to dig into all that you do and read more about you and your book series and follow the news that's coming along, where can they find you online?
Yes, I have 2 websites for Dork Diaries fans. The website is www.dorkdiaries.com. It's basically the title of the book, and I'm all over social media as well, if you just type in Dork Diaries. And for Max Crumbly fans, basically the same thing. Our website is www.maxcrumbly.com, and again, if you type that into any social media, you'll find information too. So basically just, using the book titles, Dork Diaries and Max Crumbly, you'll find tons of stuff about me and the books online.
Excellent. Well, we're going to send everybody to see you and to pick up the new release, The Misadventures of Max Crumbly, Masters of Mischief. Rachel, this has been so much fun talking. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. I've had a great time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Author Stories. Go to hankgarner.com to find all of the archives of the show, and be sure to subscribe while you're there. Now stay tuned for a special audiobook clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
Welcome to historic Sleepy Hollow, settled in 1640. Jason had looped around the town and had come up Broadway from the south. Behind the retaining wall next to the sign, a yard worker turned on his leaf blower, sending a tidal wave of yellow and red up and over the stones to splash off the windshield of the RV. They passed antique shops, a Shell station, and a Food King grocery.
"This is the same Broadway, you know," said Eliza. "It goes all the way down to Times Square. Used to be an Indian trail, Manhattan to Fort Orange, for the fur trapping business."
She kissed the dog.
"Oh, don't worry, baby. Nobody's gonna skin you. And you know what the town's most famous for?"
"Well, duh," Jason said. Every kid named Crane, especially one as tall and skinny as Jason, had heard a lifetime of Ichabod jokes. He hoped never to hear another.
"Did you know it was a real place?"
"Of course," he said, though he hadn't.
"Don't be so smart," said Eliza. "Turn here."
The streets sloped towards the Hudson, the hillside trying to shake the village off its back. Jason slipped in behind a UPS truck and drove upwards. They turned onto Gory Brook Road. He stuck his head out the window, trying to pass. The UPS truck turned aside to the right. And he saw the house.
Here, here,"
said Eliza. She pointed at the driveway of 417 Gory Brook. Jason brought the RV to a smoke-belching halt. The house stood on a knoll, above a steep yard that angled downwards toward the Hudson. An ancient sycamore on the front lawn leaned precariously. The roof was an irregular A-frame, with a long slope on the left and a short one on the right, like a rotated checkmark. The upper floors were trimmed with bands of chocolate-brown wood in a rectangular pattern. They made the house look as if it were trapped behind the bars of a jail cell. A tiny triangular portico extended over the front door, which was rough-hewn, rounded on top, held together by two vertical metal bands, and dotted with nail heads. A Gothic novel in Braille. The gray-blue curtains at the ground floor bay window gave the place a veiled eye aspect, like his grandmother's cataracts. The house seemed to be inspecting Jason with that eye.
"What are you doing here, boy?" "I'm watching you."
Eliza put a hand on his shoulder. He jumped.
"This is it,"
she said. She slapped the dashboard. "This is what?"
"Our new home."
"But—" Jason turned to her, baffled. Her face sparkled with delight.
"Surprise!"